Not too long ago, I attended a worship service in another country that could probably be best described as mind-blowing. The worship leader, the music leader, was a well-meaning fellow. He wanted to lead God-honoring worship, but as he was attempting to lead the music to begin the service, there were children running everywhere, even around him, up and down the aisles and playing and laughing and making noise. I don't blame the children. They were just being children. They were just having fun. But in the audience, only a certain few were even singing. Many of them were talking among themselves. Others were walking up and down the aisles or performing different functions within the church with no regard at all to what was taking place with respect to singing hymns and praises to God. I felt sorry for the fellow because that aspect of worship that day was anything but God-honoring. It was most disorderly and it was confusing. In a way, that's what was happening in Corinth in the first century as Paul gets to 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 20 through 40. Now, the context were a bit different, of course. The issues were different. But the primary issue in those verses, as Paul writes them in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, is worship that's less than God-honoring because it's disorderly and because it's confusing. And in fact, in those verses, verses 20 through 40, Paul's primary point is going to be made in three verses. In verse 20, verse 33, and verse 40. In verse 20, he tells them to be mature in their thinking. With respect to evil, be babes, but be mature in their thinking. And in the context there, he's speaking about God-honoring worship. Moving down to verse 33, Paul says that the God of the Bible is not a God of disorder, but he's a God of peace. And that Greek term there translated peace is eirene. It's a beautiful word. But here it means more than just a cessation of hostilities. It means harmony. God is a God of harmony. And don't we see that in his creation? His creation is very orderly. Even after the fall, we still see order in creation. It's one of the proofs for the existence of God, the fact that there's this incredible order in creation. And we see something of God through his creation. And that is that he is not a God of disorder, but he's a God of order. In fact, when we get to verse 40, Paul makes an application. Since we worship a God of order and not disorder, since we don't worship a God of confusion, Paul says that all things, and in the specific context again, he's speaking about worship, all things should be done properly and in good order. And in the intervening verses, in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 20 through 40, Paul brings up some specifics with respect to the Corinthian situation. Apparently, when they were speaking in tongues, which was legitimate at the time that Paul wrote this, too many people were speaking at once. When people were prophesying, perhaps too many people were speaking at once. And Paul stresses the priority of prophecy over tongues in this section because one of the aspects of worship that we neglect sometimes is the fact that even though it's God-honoring, all that are present should be edified. It shouldn't just be one or two people. All present should be edified. So Paul brings up some of these specific issues. But the application for today could be made in these three verses. First, be mature in our thinking with respect to worship. Not childish, but mature in our thinking. We need to remember that the God of the Bible is a God of order. He's not a God of confusion. He's a God of eirene. He's a God of peace and harmony. So our worship of him should be harmonious. It should be orderly. And then the conclusion Paul draws in the last verse of that chapter, all things, and in the proper context, it's all things with respect to worship, all things should be done properly and in good order. Bottom line, God-honoring worship will be focused upon God, not the worshiper, with a view toward the building up of all who are in attendance. And it should take place in an environment of harmony and structure, not confusion and disorder. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.